Welcome. My name is Evan Williams. I'm the Cybersecurity Business Group Director here at Microsoft Australia New Zealand, and I'm joined today by Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a consultant at Arinco and I lead the security tech stream.
Great to have you here, Paul. Today we're going to talk about privileged access management and one of those critical topics within cybersecurity. And we've got 5 mitigations we're going to go through. So let's jump in. The first one, this is all around least privileged approach. So we're finding that 63% of customers don't implement a least privileged approach. What are the challenges here, Paul? Why do you think that this number is so large? What do customers need to review and implement to get this in place?
So I'll just start talking about some of those challenges that they face to actually implement privilege management. So from what we're seeing with the customers that we work with is they don't really have the identification of the roles and the access entitlements that they're assigning to people. So they don't understand what permissions are being assigned out there. They're not ensuring that when they are assigning permissions, that instead of granting them, too much elevation, they're assigning a permission that is just right for their role. So the other challenge that we see as well is it's fine to get that in place, but over time, we're changing who has permissions to things. We have new services that are coming online as well. So we need to assign permissions to those. Do people's roles change over time as well? So therefore, there might be a time when those roles and those privileges are appropriate, but over time, they are no longer appropriate for them. So those are the challenges that we're seeing. But there are some kind of key actions that you can take to help alleviate these issues and get your permissions in line with what fits with best practices. The first thing that you'd really want to do is you've got to take stock of what you've got. You need to audit what people have. What are the systems? What are the services that you've got out there? It might be cloud, could be on premises. So we need to understand, who are the people that have access and what do they have access to? When we are then looking at what those roles are and what permissions are assigned, looking at things such as, avoid direct assignments. Don't just give permissions to a specific service or an application. Better management techniques are create a security group that you can put them in, so then you can manage that group effectively. It's easier to find. It's a centralized way that you can assign those permissions. But then if we're extending it out a little bit further into something like Entra ID, for example, we've got, or Azure as well, the Azure platforms, we've got roles. And those roles are built with specific privileges to grant you rights to do certain things within the platforms that you're working with. So that's a really key one to keep in mind. Make sure as well, if you are creating groups, give them a consistent naming approach as well. So if you've got a group and you're assigning people into that and somehow assigning permission somewhere, make it meaningful, make it descriptive. Because if we have a group and people are in there and it's not descriptive, it's meaningless. We don't know what it's really used for. For our cloud environments as well, in recent years, we've gone into hybrid where we've got on-premises identity, we've got cloud identities. If we are going to manage our cloud environments, we can sync those from on-premises. But for our privileged accounts, let's keep those separated. We want to keep them apart because if something happens to the on-premises environment, we're reducing the blast radius of what could occur for our cloud environment. So we're getting some protections there. So that's always a good thing to keep in place as well. Whilst there are also built-in roles that we can use, let's look at use those to start with. It might give you reader access, contributor, if I'm talking about the Azure platform here, or if I'm looking at Entra ID, we've got, might be a user administrator or someone who can do password resets, right? So use those, start with them. You can create custom roles, but leave that a little bit later until you understand what you can do with them and how that will probably break down and reduce the amount of privileges people are assigned. Also within your Azure platform as well, we traditionally would create service accounts so that we could have applications have access to something. So it could do something that is privileged for that application to work correctly. With Entra ID, look at something like your managed identities as well. So this is an identity that, for instance, you could create it and it's assigned for a specific virtual machine or an application and it has the rights to access keys and secrets and so forth. But it's got a really good lifecycle management. So if we then get rid of that VM, for example, and it's only assigned to that VM, that managed identity is gone. So we don't have to worry about that account any further. And very important is whilst, we've got all these good best practices in place, always audit, always monitor, because there's always a slight chance that something will happen. And if you've got those capabilities, you can then look at something post-breach, or you can look to see what has happened in the environment, and that can help to keep you protected, and then, increase your controls to have better protections.
That's great. Just such some really good tips there. I'd love to how you started with make sure you know where the roles are, what access entitlements there are in place, then use tools, processes to manage, and then that criticality of staying on top of things, because things are always changing.
That's right.
So make sure you've got that process in place to continue audit and review. Let's move on to the second mitigation. So here we've got no privilege separation. So 41% of customers have no privilege separation, which is, again, a really challenging statistic there, given how important we know privileged status is. This can become really complex quickly. And so are there some steps that customers can take to mitigate this security concern?
Sure are. So once again, I'll just talk about those customer challenges and what we see in this space. So, with that privilege separation, people might have a lack of awareness about what they should be doing, what are the right things that we should be putting in place so that we can, correctly assign our permissions. And when we're talking about privilege separation as well, it might be talking about our on-premises environment, our cloud environment, it might be applications as well that need to speak to each other. Really key here as well is, having over-provisioned permissions as well. So, and having a lack of reviews of those. So, over permission. So if someone is only updating email addresses, for example, why are you assigning them global administrator? That's a little bit too much for them to have. So they don't require it at that time. But also when you do get those permissions right, how do you actually review it? How do you consistently keep on top of those as well to make sure that people aren't getting put in, people's privileges are also remaining separate. Mistakenly, syncing on-premises identities to the cloud.
We spoke about that before.
We did. And whilst we want that for a lot of our identities, so people can be productive, they can log in, they can access email, they can work on their documents, that's fantastic. But when we're talking about things such as our privileged accounts, we don't want that. And once again, to reiterate, it's so that if something happens to that on-premises account,
doesn't go.
The blast radius is contained to that environment, so we're not then spreading to the cloud. Because also, if it does spread to the cloud, we can then integrate with other cloud services beyond Microsoft, and then it could spread even further. So keeping that contained is really, really important. Also, privileged accounts and what people are using, depending on what they need to do, what kind of access can they get? Are they able to access the internet? Are they able to install applications? Do they need to do that? Because if someone can access the internet, they can install applications. That's just creating, an environment where, they can get something that is malicious. They can install it. So, separating the abilities for what they can actually do within that environment as well is quite important. So, let's think about those key actions about what we should really be thinking about there. So, we should always think about permissions and the roles that we're assigning, and adhere to that principle of least privilege. So don't give someone privileges that they're not going to use in, when they're doing some administrative tasks. Like I said earlier, don't give global admin to someone who's just going to be updating email addresses, for example. Not required. Also, just like before, you've got to audit. You've got to understand who has permissions, who has role assignments, where are they assigned as well. So we can be going across on-premises, we've got cloud, that can then extend into third-party cloud. So it's a really big kind of scope in terms of where they can have all of those permissions. So you always then want to make sure you're doing those regular reviews because, once again, things change over time, people's roles change, so how do we keep on top of that? So we can use things like, access reviews, where we can automate those sorts of capabilities, where I will get something that tells me who has access into a role. I could automate people who don't, to remove them from roles if they don't use it, or I can make a decision as well. So that's a really good thing to use, the access reviews. Also separate your accounts, standard accounts from administrative accounts. So if I am an administrator within an environment, I should be using my standard account for my things like email and the collaboration. If I then need to do something that is, administrative, I need to do something with, Exchange or SharePoint or whatever, I might need to elevate my privileges, we'll then use a role that has those privileges assigned. Key thing there as well is if I'm always got elevated privileges, I could be on email, I can click on a phishing link, something happens and whoop, we're in big trouble. So keep those accounts separate. We've said before, keep those accounts separate if it's an on-premises privileged identity and if it's a cloud. So keep those separated as well, and that's reducing your blast radius. If there are anything such as default administrator accounts, well, they could be well known. We don't know how secured they may be. Always disable those. Create your own accounts that probably have your own naming standards and give it a really good passphrase. Also, with these privileged accounts, let's then look at privileged identity management, because then we can control when people get access or their privileges are elevated and for how long they have that access as well. And of course, and always enable your auditing and monitoring.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I think this is so critical to that zero trust principle. ID is the security for a company. You do not want to have multiple privileged users just with access to everything and ability to change everything. Staying on top of it like you've just gone through is just so critical. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the next mitigation. So privileged identity management solution. So we find that 8% of customers just don't have this management solution in place. So if customers are identifying that they want to do it, but they're struggling, how could you suggest help? How could they look at it?
Yeah, well, let's talk about those challenges again. And this does continue from some of the things that we've already spoken about with those privileged accounts. And we did mention privileged identity management, so now we get to do a little bit more of a deep dive into it. But people may not be using privileged identity management, which controls, just-in-time access to elevating your privileges for a specific amount of time, but they may not be using because they just lack the awareness that it's available to them and what it can actually do. Another one that I've seen is, a bit of resistance, because, we've gone from we just enter a username password to now username password, we've got MFA, now we've got username password MFA, and now we might need to include an additional step to elevate our privileges. So you may get some resistance
Fatigue,
there. Correct, that's right. We've also had instances where someone needs access to something, so someone goes and manually adds it in. What if they forget to remove those permissions when they no longer require it? How can we automate that and make it a little bit easier as well? Or, permissions have been permanently assigned, so they're always there, which is, not too good. So, the key actions that I would look for in this scenario is, implement privileged identity management so that we can make sure that it's just in time. So when I need those privileges to be elevated, they can be elevated. And we can also then dictate the length of time I will have that elevation for. So whilst I've got an account that can do a lot in the environment, it can't do much until I elevate and get my permissions then escalated. So that administrative account can't do much until we need it to. What is really good here as well is, assign time-bound access. So whilst we elevate it when we need it, do I only need it for 2 hours? Do I need it for 4 hours? We can set limits on that as well in terms of how long someone can remain elevated until then those privileges are removed. Look at as well with eligibility. So for a lot of people, it might be that you need to assign them a role and they can be permanently eligible. And what that means is they can escalate their privileges up to the required level that they require when they need it, and they can do that for as how long until we remove them. However, you can also have eligibility where it's not permanent. And this is quite good for those instances where you might have someone who only requires that capability for 6 months, for example. It could be an external contractor who only requires that elevation for the lifetime of that project that they're working on. And at the end of that lifespan, it's automatically removed. So that kind of governance, simplifies it and automates it. So that makes life quite easy as well. For some instances as well, and especially like, I just mentioned contractors, you might want them to have the ability to elevate their privileges for a specific amount of time. But because they are external, or it could be a specific role, you might want to have approvals on that. So someone can't just elevate to global admin whenever they feel like it.
Yep.
You might have it so that they have to go through an approval process. So a person must say, yes, I agree with this, and they will approve it. And then of course the elevation will occur. And with that as well, we might also look at things such as, context, authentication context. So there are some new capabilities that are in preview now, dependent on what you are actually doing. And when you do that elevation, and it's more around that identity space at the moment, you may need to then do another form of MFA. So I may have signed in with, passwordless and so forth. And then typically with PIM, I'm MFA'd, so that's okay. But depending on what task I'm working on, I may need to have to do another MFA, which could be using my authenticator or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's that conditional access, which is critical,
Yeah, so that'll be interesting as that starts expanding out further as well, because we see a lot of people wanting to add in those MFA capabilities just for that extra protection. As well, we talked about having approvers and approvals. So when you're doing that, you might also want to have a justification in there. So you can have someone needing to enter in some text. Now that justification might, put a little bit of context around what they're doing, but it might also relate to a ticket that they're working on. So it might be in their, management system. There could be a change that's been approved, and they want to tie that together so they can understand why those permissions are getting elevated. And of course, because we're actually adding people into all of these roles, and yes, they're not always elevated, we can enable access reviews. Because then over time, we want to make sure that the right people are in the right roles, whether they should be there, and then we can, take actions to actually, they can stay there or can we remove them from there. And of course, always do your monitoring and auditing so you can understand what's going on in the environment.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was a set of 10 actions there, Paul. I loved, again, you just had this beautiful combination of processes and tools that you need to get in place to have a critical management solution around identity. So thank you. Let's move on to the fourth mitigation here. So no MFA, or MFA is not mandatory on privileged accounts. 21% of customers were found not to have this in place. So again, why should customers care about MFA, and what are the key considerations?
Yeah, customers should definitely care about MFA because that is that first line of protection that we have against password-based attacks. So, and a lot of people don't have great passwords, or they should be using passphrases, which are better than passwords. And then when we're looking at administrative accounts, if they don't have MFA and that account gets breached, there's a lot of damage that could occur in that environment. So yeah, MFA on all privileged accounts, you want to get it enabled. And what are the challenges to getting there? Well, we've seen that 21% of people, organisations don't have it enabled. Is there a lack of awareness? Do they not understand? And while it's becoming more pervasive in our life with all the online services that we use, they just may not be aware. They may not have that kind of knowledge about what they need to do in their environment to protect it. They may also have a lack of coverage. So whilst you've got MFA enabled, have you enabled it for every role? Does every administrator have it enabled? So you've got to be really aware of, are the accounts protected? But then also, you could break it down by the service that it's protecting as well. So you might have cloud applications that it's protecting, but you might have it so it's not configured to do all of the cloud applications. So that's where you can also get some of that coverage missing as well. There could be resistance to MFA. It's starting to go down, not as much, but we still see it.
Yeah.
You say you're going to enable MFA, and there is resistance. Why am I doing this? This is wasting my time, and really you've got to talk about what are the benefits so they can understand what it means to actually turn MFA on and what it's going to do for them. And of course, there's also legacy applications.
Yeah.
So these are applications that don't support modern authentication, don't support conditional access, multi-factor authentication, and of course they're going to be a problem. And there could be something administrative in there, could be the data that's in there as well, which is going to be a bit of a problem that you don't want to have it exposed. So looking at the key actions to round this out and try and close that coverage gap. Once again, we're starting with the audit. Who are the privileged accounts and what are the services and locations that they're using? So, are they using all of the Microsoft services? Are we using third-party cloud? What are they actually using? Now, after we actually know this, we wanted to start turning it on as much as possible, as quick as possible as well. We can start with auditing so we can understand what would be the impacts. But really, this is for privileged accounts. We want to move quite quickly on this. So we want to make sure that it's enabled for all admin accounts with no exceptions, where possible.
That's right.
Hopefully,
the attackers are just going to find where it's not there, and that's where they're going to go.
That's right. There's a few little instances there where you do have those exceptions for like your break glass, where you may not have MFA, but we've got other methods of making sure those accounts are protected. But then look at what are the controls that I want to apply when it comes to MFA? So, in some instances, I might be sitting in an office location and I'm just doing my email and writing documents. Because I'm in an office and we trust it, we might not be applying MFA. But for instance, for an administrative account, I don't care where you're sitting. Doesn't matter where you are, we should just be applying it. Because if someone did get into your building and they actually had that password, they won't get challenged for MFA. So no matter where they are, challenge them for MFA and make it quite often as well. Every time that they're signing in with a new session, just do it. So that's something that is really important to enable. The other thing as well is if we are going to enable them from MFA, get them to register ASAP. Don't let it hang around where they're waiting days and weeks. And that can be something that occurs more on the non-privileged account side, just to get people to enable it. But with these privileged roles, get it enabled. Because if you don't, then you've got that gap and you don't want something to occur when that happens. We did mention as well a little bit earlier about legacy applications that don't support MFA. You've got a few options here. Update your application so it does support it. If not, look at decommissioning that application. It's getting a bit long in the tooth. It's not supporting the secure protocols that we do expect today. Also, because we are using Entra ID, and it works with all of our Azure platform. It's working with Microsoft 365, but we can extend that out into third-party cloud as well. And so look at centralizing your identity platform using Entra ID. And then so when you're signing into Azure, when it's, it might be M365, you're doing administrative stuff in there, or it's out to third-party clouds, we can use that one identity. Because it's that one identity, we can then apply policies that enforce MFA no matter where they are signing in from. It can be consistent across all of those administrative tasks that they need to do. And also for privileged roles, we might step it up a level. So sure, we might use Authenticator for a lot of our MFA, but how can we step it up a notch and make it even harder for someone to compromise it? Let's use phishing resistant MFA, those FIDO2 keys. So you've got to have a key with you, and if you don't have it with you, then good luck trying to steal that session. It just makes it better, more secure for admins to make sure that ensure that they are not going to get compromised.
So important, this topic. I mean, in all the data you read about what's happening out in the market of cybersecurity, MFA is critical for all of us, but for privileged accounts, that is just so critical. And you've just gone through a set of 8 actions that we can take just to make sure that we're on top of that.
That's right.
Onto the 5th mitigation. 23% of customers have no hardened workstations used for administration. So Again, I'll hand over to you. This is another challenging environment. 23% is large. What are the controls and actions that customers can take here?
Yeah, so we've concentrated on the identity space, but we've also got to remember that administrators, they need to work on a workstation somewhere to get their job done. So customer challenges in this space, there's a time and effort to actually set up a privileged access workstation. So privileged access workstation is a workstation that we're going to have for administrators that has more controls in it. It's more locked down. So it can be a bit more difficult to apply those controls and make sure people can still be productive. So, tuning those, getting them right, that could be a little bit off-putting for someone who needs to do that, and there's a lot of time and effort that you may need to put into that. But once you get it right, it's really worth it. The other thing as well, you might have privileged access workstations. Are people using them? Are they trying to access from other workstations that they should not be? So some challenges there. And really the key actions to kind of look at in terms of how do we remediate this is, once again, we want to look at what are all the privileged accounts that we do have within the environment. What are the different services, applications, devices that they need to connect to on a daily basis to do their administrative tasks? Are they internal staff as well? Are they external? Is it from an MSP or something along those lines? Who are those people? Do we have something available for them to actually do their administrative tasks? Exactly. So we also then want to look at the placement of these workstations. So are you going to put them in management networks so that they're a bit more secure, a bit more locked down? Who can get to those privileged access workstations? So for example, it might be in a management network where it's got connectivity to management interfaces or something along those lines, and so it can't actually then connect out to the internet or other parts of those networks because there's going to be some highly privileged users on there doing some tasks on there that could be people might try to exploit if they could get to those. These workstations themselves, don't use any default passwords or anything simple. We really want to lock those down. Now, while the administrator's not going to be logging on with these passwords, they'll have, they could, depending on where this is sitting, but, let's just make sure that they are complex, passphrase, change the default account name as well, or put in a different account there as well. Because of all of the tasks that are occurring on this, there's going to be a lot of network traffic, where they're connecting to things to do their tasks. They might be extracting data from somewhere to actually do whatever they need to do. So let's think about how do we ensure that data is encrypted in transit. We're using TLS 1.2 wherever possible. Any data that is stored on the device, it's encrypted at rest as well. We could be looking at things such as BitLocker to do that sort of thing for us. The actual workstation itself, so how do we actually start putting controls in place there? How do we make sure that it is secure, that operating system? Now, we can start looking at what are the standards as well that we want to kind of align to that can kind of guide us to what are those controls that we want to put in place, what are the configurations that we need to have, the Essential 8.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time with customers around the Essential 8. It's critical here.
That's right. It looks simple when you're kind of reading it, the things that you need to do, but not everyone is doing it. So you really want to start putting those things into place. What about the CIS controls, CIS controls, about the different things that we can enable on that endpoint as well to lock it down? So from that, if we're looking at the Essential 8, we want to make sure that we're running the latest supported operating system where possible. Have that up and running. It's if it's supported by the vendor, you're in good shape. Are they receiving security fixes for that version? If they are, that is good. So that is a really good start. Then start your patching as well. Make sure you have regular patches. That cadence that occurs, on Patch Tuesday and so forth, make sure that you're aligning with those. But it doesn't stop there because, sure, you've got the operating system and some of those applications, but you're installing a lot of third-party applications. Are you updating those? You want to make sure you're updating it. So you might need vulnerability management. So, if you've got Defender for Endpoint, you can start collecting all that sort of information from the endpoint, understand what applications are deployed, and then you can get alerts when there are exploits that are publicly available or if you are missing any updates so that you can keep it up to date. So patching, updates, OS, applications and third parties really need to keep on top of that. In addition to that as well, EDR, Defender for Endpoint, get your endpoint detection and response deployed. It's like AV, but it goes beyond AV. It gives us a lot more information in terms of how we can actually react to behaviors that are occurring on the endpoint. So for example, AV might use a signature. It says, oh, I found a file. This doesn't look good. We're going to block it. We're going to quarantine it. Whereas, with EDR, it's going to look at behaviors. It's going to say, well, I can see someone has actually logged on to this endpoint. They've downloaded this file. This file has automatically spawned a process, which has spawned a PowerShell, which has spawned a script, and it's now connecting to other services. And it's like, hold on a minute, this doesn't look good. Yeah. Exactly. And it can then just shut down, in terms of it'll do a remediation and say, this is not good behavior. We're going to stop this behavior in its tracks, and then you can get alerts from it. Having a firewall configured as well, making sure that people can't, or network connections can't connect in and try to download a malicious payload, for example. Attack surface reduction as well, putting that in place. So do I, just say you do have an application, for some reason you've got Adobe on there. I don't know why you'd want to have it there, but it's an example of what attack surface reduction can do. If it's trying to spawn, a process, it can just stop it in its tracks. Yep. So having attack surface reduction is pretty important as well. We can also do credential protection as well, so people can't extract the credentials that are on the device itself, because if they do and they get a hold of that, hopefully we've got MFA in place to stop them from doing anything if they do get some credentials. But putting credential protection in there as well. To round that out as well, what are the processes? Do people understand how they should be using these workstations? Has this been documented in terms of who should be using it? Should they be installing applications? How are you maintaining it over time? Who's responsible for putting administrative applications on there and keeping them up to date as well? So, what are the roles and responsibilities of how these should be used is quite important. Physical security, of course. If someone's able to take that workstation and walk out with it, they've got a lot of time on their hands to actually try and compromise that endpoint and get what they need. So make sure it's the physical security means that people can't get to that workstation. People are going to it's like a jump box they're going to jump onto. So they don't need physical access to it. Make it so they've got to get through to it via a network. But then also virtualize it where possible. Bit harder to steal if it's virtualized. So and plus you can spin those up a bit quicker. You can get rid of them a lot easier, and you don't have to worry about what's being stored there. That's more about the virtualization environment, or it might be stored out in Azure, which is very protected by Microsoft as it is. And of course, my favorite one at the end is always monitor and audit, so you actually understand what's occurring on that workstation, who's been on it, what they've been doing, but also extend it beyond. Are those administrators actually using their accounts to sign into other endpoints that aren't, for privileged accounts, so that you can actually catch it out and say, hey, don't use this workstation over here to be, better protected.
Love how we always finish on the audit there. And again, another great set of actions to stay on top of the workstation. We've spoken a lot about the identity. We've spoken a lot about the privileged user, that admin, and securing that. And then we finished with the workstation. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with as you think about this topic? Because we went through so much.
Yeah, I think, you've got to make sure that you are auditing to kind of understand what privileged roles are in the environment, what they have access to, what workstations are they logging onto. And once you get, that picture, you can start then understanding where is it getting used within the environment? Is there any changes that we need to make? Are there any kind of controls we need to add? But then, it'll just help you understand how it's getting used within your environment.
That's great. I'll just finish by saying, the report talks a lot about just getting the fundamentals in place, and you've spoken about the criticality, but then taking it further. But 99% of attacks can be stopped by just making sure you've got the fundamentals of patching, multi-factor authentication. Those zero trust principles are just key, and you spoke about them beautifully.
Yep, correct.
Thank you.